Well, I have to tell you, working with your mom in the audience is intimidating. I just get that off the Ralph asked me, he said, "Are you nervous?" I said, "Nowhere, except when my mom is in the audience," okay? So, because she's given me very strict advice about my public speaking, and so does my wife, and so this is going to be short. The advice is the same for both of them, make it short. So, it is a real pleasure to be here. Ralph had asked me to be part of this a few months ago, and it finally worked out in our schedule that I could do that. And I'm really pleased to share with Rotary the character of leadership, an ancient model for a quantum age. And this comes from my work over the last really 15 years in consulting, and it's been a labor of love over the last 3 years after I wrote the book by that title and have been talking about it ever since. Because my proposition is that leadership is an inside-out, character drives leadership. So who you are on the inside is who you will be as a leader. And you'll see on the tables that as I walk down through the model this afternoon, I'm going to ask you to give yourself some scores. So I hope you brought your pen. This is like a classroom, and I'm going to ask you to give yourself some scores. So let me jump into this. This notion of character and leadership came to me actually during the master's program that Ralph mentioned just a few minutes ago. And it became very evident to me that for some reason, we in the United States have lost our ability to talk about character publicly without it degrading into some sort of a rock throwing contest. Now, Rotary is a great place to talk about character because that's really what you're all about. But I felt compelled to try and put together some notion of how organizations of all types around the world might come to this discussion of character and leadership. But the very first thing I needed to do was see if I could make a case for character as part of leadership. And so I went to my banking background and I sort of ripped from the headlines and started to answer this question: does character matter? In fact, let me just ask you, does character matter? Yes. It does, doesn't it? Why? That's harder to answer, isn't it? It's just right here, isn't it? So when you say, does it make a difference? Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important. Why? I'm not really sure. But my mom told me, or my dad told me, or my church told me, or something like that. But character does matter, but that's not enough. We have to be able to prove it. So I went back to my banking background. I'm at 17 years in the banking industry, and it's sort of a law and order approach here. Ripped from the headlines: financial service sector failure. 4 major reasons for that: market conditions, overinvestment in single-family residential mortgages, weak regulatory environment, and increased lending powers to organizations that were on their surface bankrupt when the regulatory environment was loosened. This led to the failure of 557 institutions around the United States. Sound familiar? In 1988. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Let's go back to those 4 reasons: economic conditions, weak regulatory oversight, overinvestment in single-family residential mortgages, and increased regulatory powers from regulators for organizations that were on their surface already bankrupt. In 1988, we paid $200 billion as the American taxpayers to learn that character and leadership really matter, because none of those reasons, other than the first one, the market conditions, is an economic shift. The rest of them are decisions of leadership based in character. So we spent over $200 billion in 1988 during the S&L crisis to find out that character and leadership really matter. We're spending something on the order of $1 trillion as the American taxpayers this year, 22 years later or so, to learn the very same lesson. So you actually can put a price tag on character and leadership, can't you? So that fueled me, that motivated me. Because our collective response when these sort of financial disasters occur, or any other disaster occur, is what? What do we do? What do we say needs to happen? Change. We need, yes, what was that, Beth? We need a law. That's what we need. We need to make it illegal to lie and steal and cheat. I think it was illegal to lie and steal and cheat, was it not? These challenges are not economic, they're not environmental, they're not legal, they're not social. They are challenges of character and leadership. And what happens is, like the proverbial iceberg, what do? We put a couple of folks in jail, we pass a couple of more laws, and then we go on to the next generation and we recircle. Because we've lost our ability to have this polite, progressive public discussion of what character and leadership really look like. So, in order to advance this cause, we had to come up with a definition of leadership. Leadership is the ability to move a group of people through non-coercive means to an end that is in the long-term best interest of everyone. Now that's a high bar definition, right? There's lots of things in that definition that make it challenging, right? Non-coercive is the first one, right? To lead people effectively, you have to care about them. We also need a definition of character, and if you look at Webster's dictionary, character is the combination of the distinct mental and moral qualities belonging to an individual or group, gained by self-discipline, or, and I don't like this part at all, the inhibitory control of one's instinctive impulses. So when you put those two things together, you've got now a building definition of leadership and character. And we've already established that character really matters. So let's see if we can identify what makes up character, because that dictionary definition isn't quite enough. It doesn't give us everything that we need to be successful. So let me just ask you, holler out any leaders that you can think of, historic or contemporary, that have good character, any leaders who have bad character. So let's start with the good list. Who would you put on the list of leaders with good character? Anybody? Washington. Gandhi? Yep, Gandhi. Lincoln. Churchill? Lincoln? Yep, good. Lots of folks, right? Who else? Anybody? That's a pretty good list, isn't it? What's that? Jesus. Yeah, spiritual leaders are often on that list. If Gandhi is a spiritual leader as well. Okay, how about the bad list? Who would you put on the bad list? Richard Nixon. Not that was right on the tip of her tongue, but it was kind of right on the tip of her tongue, okay? What's that? Bernie Madoff. We put him in jail. That's good. Hitler. Who else? Stalin. What's that? Stalin, Napoleon. Mao Zedong. Cain. Who? Cain. Yep. You guys are being very polite. Usually somebody throws out the political leaders, but all right, we'll stop there. We only have a short amount of time. So here's what's interesting. We know it when we see it, don't we? We know it when we see it. We know what good character looks like, and we know what bad character looks like. But if you try to build a model that helps leaders develop the kind of character that leads to the leadership that I just gave you before, you got to have more than that. So I went looking, and it turns out that there is a definition of what it means to be an authentic leader, a leader with character. And this is important because authenticity and the influence that flows from that is the most powerful tool in a leader's toolkit. So the Greek philosophers had identified 4 cardinal elements of individual character: justice, temperance, wisdom, and courage. In the first century, 3 more were added to the list: hope, love, and faith. So people a long time ago, a lot smarter than me, had already defined what makes up character. Now our challenge was, how do we bring that forward into the 21st century? How do we make that a practical, progressive discussion amongst leaders? So we built a model. And I love this quote from E.P. Box: all models are wrong, some are useful. Okay? This one's wrong too. It is not intended to tell you what to think. It is intended to tell us how to think about a very important subject. So we did a couple of things with those 7 elements. First of all, we put faith in the middle. Now I can tell you the people who created the initial list, those ancient philosophers and the first century leaders, had no concept that one of these was primary over the others. There was none of that. They would have listed them all just separately. But I think faith has to go in the middle. And the way I mean faith is not necessarily a religious expression, okay? It is the ability that is unique to human beings to unwaveringly believe in things you cannot rationally prove. It is our capacity for belief. We're the only creatures on the planet that are not genetically coded to think just one way. And what we believe gives rise to how the rest of these character elements play out, okay? So let me give you an example of core beliefs and how powerful they are. I have worn my incredibly slimming blue suit here, and I've kept it buttoned because some might suggest that, you know, I could probably lose a couple of pounds. And I would probably even suggest that as well. Now, I have had a goal for nearly my entire adult life to weigh 200 pounds. And I do weigh 200 pounds. And I weigh some other pounds on top of those 200, okay? Now, what is the formula for me to lose weight? You know it. Move more and eat less, right? But why don't I? Because I believe that this evening, after I get done with a hard day's work, I am owed a cheeseburger, right? So my problem isn't knowledge, it's belief. Here's what's incredibly important. Human beings act on what they believe, not on what they know. We act on what we believe, not on what we know. That's why we put faith in the middle. We also decided to make the model 3-dimensional. So it took some work to get this out of my head and into the hands of a graphic artist, where faith is in the middle, and now we've got these other elements sort of revolving around it. They've got some mechanical fasteners around them as well to try and depict that there's an overlap. In fact, when we were writing the book, we would find stories and we'd argue about whether it was a story of courage or a story of hope or something like that. It doesn't probably really matter, but all these elements have to work in construct with one another, and here's why. We have to be able to mold it and change it. If we can't change character, then we can't change leadership, and we're lost. But I don't believe that to be true. Character can be changed, it can be developed, and then the leadership that flows from that is what we're looking for. So let's start with each of these, and if you want to give yourself a score on each of them, I will do this kind of quickly. Faith, I've already discussed. We had to bring this model forward into the 20th century. We had to talk about it from a leadership perspective. So it says, I lead based on a clear set of positive core values that are demonstrated through my leadership actions. So do you as a leader, have a clear set of core values that not only are clear to you, but quite frankly are clear to your team. Because those are the beliefs that are going to drive your leadership into the future. Justice. I love this quote from Mark Twain. Do the right thing, it'll gratify some people and it'll astonish the rest. Right? Churchill once said about the American people, he said, I have great confidence in the American people to do the right thing once they've tried everything else. Kind of true, isn't it? So justice is exactly that. It is leading by doing what is right, even when, or maybe especially when it's difficult and costly, leading in a selfless manner that fosters personal team accountability. In the book, we wrote about Rosa Parks. A moment of doing justice, some 70 years ago now, almost. In fact, here's a picture of Rosa Parks, sitting on the very same bus that she sat down on that day and essentially fueled, not started, but fueled the civil rights movement. That was a statement of justice, doing the right thing even when it was difficult and costly, and quite frankly, holding not just the people around her to be accountable, but holding an entire nation to be accountable. And that move, not the sole motive behind this, allowed this picture to be taken in April of 2012 with the first African-American president sitting on the same bus in the museum where the bus is held in Detroit. Despite any of our political leanings, this is a demonstration of justice in America done by an otherwise unknown woman on a day she was too tired to conform to the details of what her society said were important. That's justice. Temperance. Now, my guess is I'll be the only person in the room to use the word temperance in a sentence this week. Right? This is an old word, isn't it? It's not a word that we use very often, but it's a very powerful term. It basically means personal humility mixed with passion for a cause. We sometimes think that we want leaders to be humble and retiring, and that's true. We want that not to be about them as individuals, but at the same time, we want them to be passionate about their cause. There's a story told in a book called Good to Great about Admiral James Stockdale. Jim Stockdale was the longest serving prisoner of war during the Vietnam-era conflict, spent over 5 years in the Hanoi Hilton. And he talks in this book about the humility and passion of being that prisoner of war, what it takes to be passionate about being released one day, but being humble enough to comply with the orders that were given to you. So humility is a combination, a mysterious mix, if you will, of personal humility and professional passion. Hope. Hope is one of the essential qualities of humanity. In fact, it's true that without hope, people actually perish. Hope from a leadership and character perspective means setting a very compelling vision of the future, even when existing circumstances are very bleak. The ability of a leader to create hope in people is essential, especially in times like we're in now. Napoleon said that a leader is a dealer in hope. And I actually like that metaphor, almost like the drug dealer. So here's some for you, and here's some for you, and wouldn't you like a taste, right? Passing it out and making sure people understand it. So, hope. Wisdom. Another great quote from Mark Twain. It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Isn't that the truth? I'll never forget in my banking career when I made a decision, not probably one that affected Ralph, I hope, that I was absolutely confident about and absolutely wrong about at the same time. Because as a young leader, I didn't actually know you could be both wrong and confident at the same time. right? So I learned that lesson early on. So wisdom is simply the ability to apply your accumulated knowledge and experience to current situations. And you don't have to be old to have wisdom. You can accumulate it from other people, can't you? But wisdom is an essential component of the character and leadership model. Love. Now, next to the one that I started with, which is faith, love conjures up the most interesting experience or interesting reactions from audiences, because they're generally, in the organizations that you work for, large manuals about how this isn't supposed to happen from a leadership perspective, right? There's all sorts of rules for this not to take place. But the reality is, and I do a lot of individual coaching of leaders, if you don't love people, you really can't lead them. Now, I don't mean you have to love them individually, and I don't mean you have to love them all the time, but if you're not completely fascinated with why people do what they do and how to move them in a common direction and how to do that in non-coercive ways, then don't try to lead them, because they'll be able to detect that very quickly. So how do you do in this element of love? The last one is courage. The ability to boldly lead by seizing opportunities and firmly dealing with the challenges that come about. This one is a particular challenge for me as a leader. I'm not a courageous person. I've lived a privileged life. I've never really wanted for anything, and so I've gotten very good at moving around obstacles instead of going through them. But the ability to seize opportunities and move past obstacles is something that's built into our character. C.S. Lewis said, actually, that courage is not just one of the aspects of human character, it is every aspect at its testing point. And that's really true, isn't it? So courage is an essential element of the model. So, if you've given yourself some ratings there, you have the beginnings of where do I stand from a character and leadership perspective. Now the challenge is, how can you put that to work? So the second part of the book title is an ancient model for a quantum age, which means that we have to be able to apply it to now. Ralph mentioned in the bio, the introduction that he shared with you, that I have a master's degree in theological studies, which I do. I spent 5 years after I left the bank working through Bethel Seminary to acquire this. And I learned one thing in 5 years of seminary. Context is everything. Context is really everything. So I can present to you a model, but unless you can apply it in the real work that you do on a daily basis, it may just be nothing more than an interesting one. So your context will require you to shape, cajole, shift these elements around to make them fit. By the way, you're part of the context. In other words, you are not just a laboratory observer looking in through the walls, right? You are part of the way things happen. And you're continually adjusting and changing to the context. Here's one of the things that frustrates me the most with leadership development models, and it doesn't matter whose they are, is this notion that we can research how other leaders have done it, that we can come up with this endless list of tips and tricks, and if you just do those things, you win. That's just not true. You will have to judge the people around you, the context, the operating environment, the culture of the organization, where you fit geographically within the state, where you fit within the United States, where you fit within the world. These things cannot be just taken off a piece of paper and directly applied to the environment that you're part of. But I actually think that's one of the powerful parts of a model like this, right? Is we can figure out how we would take advantage of it, how we would mold it and cajole it to fit our existing environment. So if you gave yourself some scores, I would have you now flip the model around, and instead of faith being in the middle, you've got the elements around your leadership opportunity. What is something that requires your leadership? What is something you're working on today or need to work on today that requires you to demonstrate the leadership and character ability that this model defines? Do you need to love people more? Do you need to demonstrate wisdom? Do you need to show some courage? Do you need to show some humility and some passion about your subject? Do you need to make your core beliefs known to the people around you, and how would you do that? So the application of this model in the context that you operate in is absolutely essential. So this is a very quick blast of a bunch of information that's contained beyond here, and you can access that, and you'll have some contact information if you want to take advantage of it. I mentioned before that the model, when we built it, had these mechanical fasteners we tried to make it look like it was something moldable and changeable, which in fact it is. But the real challenge is that these things need to weave together in some coherent way to be powerful. And I can't always tell you where the beginnings and the ends are. So to that extent, I have a poem that I'm going to share with you, and Connie will get a few of these out if you want to take it with you. And just reflect on how this poem goes and see if this is how we ought to be thinking about character and leadership in your organization. So it goes like this. It's called The Fisherman. Upon a sea of glass, the fishermen set sail in a small but sturdy wooden craft upon a well-made trail. They search the trusted routes for the prize the deep can share, knowing that each reaching cast would mean abundance or despair. The morning passed, and the catch came in, and the sun was well past noon, when in the eastern sky they saw the evidence of doom. The mighty storm would surely toss like a cork upon the wave that small, sturdy wooden craft and its fishermen so brave. Clearly shore could not be made, safe harbor never found, before the storm would overtake and the sailors all be drowned. Their only chance to anchor there, with a long and mighty strand, so the boat could hold in the boiling sea, yet within the sight of land. Each one had a rope, an extra length, carried for such a time, in case to rescue a fallen mate or replace a casting line. And all at once the fishermen knew, without their trusty ropes, the anchor could not hold them fast nor provide them any hope. The first to tie his extra rope to the anchor they called faith was the sailor Courage. Then Wisdom came and tied on his extra length. As his rope tied, the sea rose high and a wave cut across the boat, and out of the spray, Hope emerged, determined the craft would float. Next came Justice with well-tried skill, nodding his to anchor faith. Quietly, Temperance next in turn lashed on with his final strength. 5 ropes hung from the anchor now in a tangled, senseless heap, when Love stepped up to add his piece, and around his rope did weave the other strands in such a way to make a single length, that together the virtues of each rope would hold tight to that anchor faith. Over the side of the rugged boat, Love cast the sturdy steel. The rope played out to its very end and to hold the vessel still. The waves raged on as night approached, the craft held in the looming black, by faith lashed to the tiny boat with ropes that knew no slack. And to this day those fishermen go into seas that turn to storm, and always aboard is their anchor faith with the ropes they each had worn. That's the notion, isn't it? How do we weave together these character elements into something coherent so that we can apply them in 21st century leadership in southeastern Idaho and Pocatello, Idaho? That's the challenge we face. The whole goal of this model is to create a positive, proactive way of having a discussion about character and leadership in the marketplace, on Wall Street, on Main Street, so that we can get ourselves away from this recurring disaster of spending money to relearn the same lessons over and over again. I hope you find the model interesting. I hope you find it engaging. If you would like some of that information on your way out, please take it. And I really want to thank you for just having me come home again. It's really been fun to be here. Thanks.